committee members for this opportunity to come and talk to you today. I looked at your topic. First of all, I'm Alice Huffman, State Conference President of NAACP, National Board Member of the NAACP, and a very long-term activist in this community. And when I looked at your topic, I could have been in Honolulu. I would have come back because I think the topic is so important for the time that we find ourselves in right now and the environment that we find ourselves in. And to have you take the time to talk about policing and community trust, I couldn't think of anything more important. And so I commend you for that. And I hope that this hearing is productive. But I must tell you, I have butterflies sitting back there because in NAACP, you know, we work in this business all the time. We started out trying to prevent lynching, and so we deal with this day in and day out. And one of the conflicts we have is that our people, we got 58 branches and 30 youth units, and they're on the cutting edge, they're on the line. They're out there when these incidents happen. And so we have this interesting situation where we're very angry about some of the things that's going on in the community, and yet we understand the need for good quality law enforcement and that we cannot necessarily just abandon law enforcement because then we would have no protection. We pay our tax dollars to be protected as well. And we have a push-pull relationship going on. I heard one of the officers says he has the NAACP local person in Stanislaus County has his cell phone in his pocket. And we do try to build relationships with law enforcement. But I think it reminded me probably of what might have been happening in the old days when we were fighting for our civil rights and there was slavery and then there were some good people and then there was an awful lot of bad people. And laws didn't, nothing happened until you put laws into place. You got good people doing good things, but most of the people, you have 800 police agencies in this state. You have a whole lot of flexibility and diversity and attitudes in law enforcement. You have 800 agencies. So you have some good guys here today, which I commend them for being here. And I think you probably selected them because you want to hear about some good things going on so that you can deduce what to do next to improve the relationships. But I think you have to look at certain levels within. I have testimony here. If somebody pass it up, I probably won't use it. I never use it. I do have some recommendations. I'll get to those. But I think you have to look down into the body of law enforcement. I sit on a group called LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. They're all ex-narcotic police officers, lieutenants, the former police chief of Los Angeles is a part of it. And when you hear them talk about what goes on, we have community profiling. It's not just individual profiling. Those guys who have to go and look for the people who are using whatever they think they're using and police them because we got this war on drugs, they put a circle around our community on the weekend. And they catch anybody coming in and coming out, for any reason in and out. And it makes it very difficult because we have good quality people living in the community, not just everybody's a gang and a dopey and all the things that people worry about. What about the good quality citizens living there? We don't have police protection in our community as we think we should have it. We don't have community police protection, community policing going on because since the war on drugs, we have police officers who are looking and treating us all like criminals. And then on occasion, the good guys are embarrassed because something happens and the whole thing blows up. I have had, since I've been president in ACP, I took over in 2000, I must have had 3 or 4 hearings on this topic, on police brutality, on looking for solutions, on accountability. And the good guys come, the bad guys don't come. The good guys come and talk to you. You're sitting there and you're going, how come I can't How come I can't figure this out? Why can't we find something that will change this? Every 28 days, a black person is killed by a law enforcement person in this country. 28 hours. Every 28 hours. Talking about every 28 hours.
28
That's
hours.
your fact, isn't it? I've been saying days. I'm way off. I feel worse now. And so the Latinos and the African Americans and Orange County, we got a fact. There were like hundreds of police killings down there that nobody ever knew about, mostly Latinos. Nobody knew about them. So we do have some recommendations, but I have to tell you that I think if you don't find some laws that you can apply across the board on the use of force, I got those, one of those my recommendation, on the use of force. If you don't find some way to have early warning systems so that, for example, I said I was never going to do another hearing, so I wrote a poem, I'll leave with you. Then I wrote a piece on genocide, I'll leave with you. I got so emotional on this stuff, I don't even know why I'm here. It hurts. It hurts because you never solve the problem. It hurts because it's just black and brown kids. It hurts because you know that there's a solution, but you can't get to it. So I had the corrections secretary come. Ms. Weber came. Joan Sawyer came. We had this summit. We had the highway patrol commissioner. We had sheriffs. We had all kind of law enforcement people there in a summit to talk about a reform package that the NAACP wanted to advance. And one of the things I discovered out of that hearing is that the guys who administer law enforcement, many of them have the same problem. They have a problem because you haven't looked at the policeman's silent code of blue. You haven't looked at their union and made sure, I'm for labor, y'all know I'm CTA, 15 years CTA, but you gotta ask the question. You have to ask the question, are there labor rights circumventing our personal and our personal rights? Have they gone so far in their ability to articulate their own discipline that they can inadvertently cover up for a long time the wrongs that go on within the department? And so I discovered that those gentlemen that came and talked at our summit have some of the same problems that we have at the NAACP at a certain level. So that gets me back to, you got to look at various levels within the institution that you're talking about, because they all operate differently. And those who have the money from the war on drugs and who have their little SWAT teams and who police our communities every weekend are not these folks who are out trying to build good police relations and community relations. I do think we have to find a way to get back to community policing. I do think that the Citizens Review Committee is something that we all should want, but it has to have teeth. We tried to get somebody, I think one of my motion members is that nobody wants to carry our bills because our bills are not fund bills. And the things that we try to get done over here, before we can even get somebody to author, they're thrown out because we know what the forces are and the politics are. And little old NAACP for 105 or 6 years, 7 years now, we do good, but we don't do good money. And we don't have good resources as far as the politics go. So it's very hard to leverage change in an environment that is political as the environment we live in. But we had a bill that would ask that you stop officers from using racial epithets. Do you know what happens to a young black man when somebody uses the N-word and he's out there in the street and he's already in trouble, and then you use the N-word or you call a Latino pejorative name? I mean, what happens when you smash in a window? Or what happens when you snatch somebody out of a car? The hearing I did in Los Angeles, the reason I said I'd never do another one, some Latinos came. These people come for help. They don't know where else to go. And they brought me pictures where innocent people have been thrown to the ground and handcuffed and bashed before they ask any questions. And they don't know what to do or what we can do about it. And I finally decided I don't know what to do either and what I can do about it. And I know that the solution is in laws, because we would still have segregation if you hadn't passed a law. We would still have segregated schools if you hadn't passed a law. So my time is up. I can see you looking at the clock.
I know, I have to, and I don't want to
Okay,
do it, but yes.
Okay, but I'm going to yield because I might get a question or two. I know how to do this.
Yes,
And
you
in the
might.
back of the paper that I'm going to give you, I have a list of recommendations, if you have it. I have the poem that I want you to feel the pain I feel, and the genocide article that I wrote if you didn't get it. And I will yield because I have some outstanding people here who need their time as well.
Thank you, Pastor White.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be before you all today. My name is Bryson White. I'm a minister at Saints Rest Baptist Church in West Fresno, and I'm also a community organizer with PICO, California. PICO, we do faith-based community organizing up and down the state of California and across the nation. We have 19 federations in California. We serve 480 congregations, and we have 250,000 people who are connected to our network. We connect clergy and leaders from different faith traditions to issues of justice in our city. But most importantly in our organizing, we believe that human dignity should be at the center of our public policy. And so out of my faith tradition and out of the majority of faith traditions on the planet, we all believe that everyone is created in the image of God and that everyone has intrinsic value to their life, and that our public policy should reflect this. Unfortunately, in the United States of America, and specifically with law enforcement, people of color have been criminalized in our country and dehumanized and not seen as the image bearers of God in which we are. In our communities, law enforcement officers are seen as occupying forces instead of partners in public safety. Just a few weeks ago at St. Rest Baptist Church in West Fresno, in response to the ruling around Officer Darren Wilson and Eric Garner and the officer-involved shootings that take place in Fresno, California, we had a town hall at Saints Rest, and we had about 100 people turn out. And we lifted up our stories around what our interactions have been like with law enforcement. We had 20 to 30 people actually share stories around their negative interactions with law enforcement. We had people talking about how they were placed on curbs, people were beat by law enforcement, story after story about being followed around by law enforcement in communities and feeling intimidated by law enforcement who's supposed to be policing our communities and keeping us safe. I myself, when I was 19 years old, was followed by a police officer for around a mile. I knew he was following me. I was making sure I was under the speed limit. He actually approached my car with his service weapon drawn out. That's how he knocked on my window with his pistol. Actually, he knocked on my window with his pistol, and I was afraid for my life. But due to the training that I received from my parents in regards to how to interact with law enforcement, because they knew that I would come into situations where my life would be on the line because I would be confronted with the law enforcement apparatus, I actually left that situation with my life. In many instances, unfortunately, people of color are leaving these situations without their lives intact, and it's a disgrace to this country and to our communities. Earlier today, I want to lift this up, but jot a little note down when I was here listening. There was two gentlemen here, two white gentlemen, who said that the process is working, is what they said. The process around data collection and the process around policing our communities is working. And the irony of this situation to me is that two white men are saying that the process is working when it's people of color that are dying at the hands of law enforcement in our communities. And that doesn't make any sense, right? So you had two people who are disconnected from the pain of the wreckage of law enforcement practice in our community, lifting up a narrative that is false, that the process is working. As my sister said to my left, that every 28 hours, a person of color, a black person, is killed by law enforcement in the United States. And that tells you right there that this process is not working. Unless the process is intended to be an occupying force, in that sense, the process would be working. But if the intent is to provide public safety, then the process of policing in this country and in California is not working. What I found interesting in regards to the gentleman who lifted it up, and that's a narrative that I hear back home from our police chief and from local law enforcement officials that the process is working, but you have 10% of officer-involved shootings across the country take place in California cities alone. And so that's another sign that shows that this process is not working, in which we need our legislative body to step in to be able to pass legislation that ensures the lives of all people are valued. And so we have that every 28 hours piece. And so what's crucial to me in lifting up this narrative around law enforcement and community trust is the mantra of Black Lives Matters. And so this is a mantra that we've seen taken to the streets in Oakland, California, Richmond. We've seen it in Ferguson. We've seen it in New York. We've seen it in Fresno. And it's critical that law enforcement actually begins to believe that Black Lives Matters, because if law enforcement doesn't believe that Black Lives Matters, we're going to continue to see the epidemic of officer-involved shootings in our country. And I say that intentionally when I say epidemic. One of the things that really bothers me as a minister in the area in which I serve, where law enforcement is routinely harassing people of color and also shooting at people of color, is the wreckage that is left behind amongst our young people. When an officer is involved in a shooting, he's afforded the counseling needed for him to process what has actually happened in the situation. But young people in our community, they're not afforded that same process. And so when an officer shoots down a person in our community, what do we do and who do we turn to process the trauma that leaves in our neighborhoods? We don't have anyone.
Please, we don't allow applauding or comments from the audience. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. They're just feeling what I'm talking about because they feel the pain. But I hear you, Sister Hancock. Yeah, I do.
But we do this for everybody.
Yeah, I hear you, Sister Hancock. But what do we do when we don't have places to go and to process that trauma? A situation in Fresno that I would like to lift to you all in 2013 that came to pass was there was an incident between law enforcement and a community member, and Fresno Police Department rolled a tactical unit down a residential street in West Fresno, which community members described as a tank. I don't know the exact term of what that tactical unit is called, but it looked like a tank to me. And so those sorts of incidences which bear out in places and communities of color is a major piece on why communities of color have distrust towards law enforcement officials. But I also would like to lift up two incidences in which we're seeing some progress being made in community relations with law enforcement, and that would be through some of the work that is taking place through PICO Federations in Oakland with the Oakland Police Department, where Pastor Cummings and others have been afforded the opportunity to be able to train the Oakland Police Department on implicit bias, which is really critical because everyone in a racialized society carries implicit bias, and so that's going to bear out in whatever job that we're in. So it also bears out in law enforcement, and so that has bridged some community trust with the police department, from my understanding, and also what our brother in Richmond lifted up around the Lifelines to Healing work in Richmond, California, where there's been, through ceasefire initiatives, there's been a drastic reduction in officer-involved shootings and in gun violence in the city. So those are some two examples and it just lifts up and shows that that what's put out there in our communities, what's happening, doesn't have to be the case. This isn't a space where we're left stuck and can't cause change between law enforcement and our community relations. So that's some other instances which I think which are powerful. I think something I need to lift up as well, as you can see me kind of going through my rough notes here, is that today we've been talking about data a lot, which is so important, and we've been talking about these pieces, but I find it hard for me to process that there's only one panel for conversation from community members, and there's only 3 of us, when there's so many people who work in our communities around law enforcement and community relations issues, and we don't have anybody here who is really testifying to the pain throughout the day of what it means to be brutalized by police departments. So I wanted to lift that up to you all, that the next time that we come together to provide adequate space for a diversity of community voices to be able to lift up the pain in our community, because it's not enough to talk about data. It's more important to put a person's face to what that data actually entails. Lastly, because I can see the look on Sister Hancock's face, so I'll conclude. I know it's been a long day for you all, but for us, this leads for us to believe that that CalGrip needs to be funded more efficiently, for more dollars to go into that program, so that we can increase community police relations and reduce not only gun violence in the urban setting, but gun violence of law enforcement officials towards people of color, and particularly in California. And then just in conclusion, again, I wrap all this within the narrative that comes out of the Judeo-Christian tradition that all people are created in the image of a holy and loving God, and our public policy really needs to be reflective of that. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to questions as well.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, committee chair and members of the Public Safety Committee. My name is Jeanette Sanipatin. I am the legislative staff attorney for the Mexican American Legal Defense and
You can
Educational
pull the
Fund.
mic, that mic, for some reason, you have to pull it a little closer.
Or
I
Mo-
see.
or MALDEF. Thank you so much for allowing me to come here to testify today, and I also wanted to lift up the comments made by my brother to my left, that there are definitely voices that aren't here at the table that are affected by this on a day-to-day basis, and I want to make sure that we do provide a space, and I know that there will be an opportunity for public testimony after we present, but I think it is important to acknowledge the direct pain and the victimization and the dehumanization that our communities face on a day-to-day basis, and that there are organizations that are directly work with our communities and definitely have those stories to tell and the pain to tell as well. I wanted to just sort of give an overview of sort of what kinds of things we are seeing from the Latino perspective and from the immigrant perspective here in California. I did have the opportunity to talk to my colleagues statewide about what are some of the issues they're seeing on the ground with regards to police abuse and in terms of officer-involved shootings as well. A lot of things that we have been seeing on the ground are just part of that continuum of abuse that we see around police abuse and officer-involved shooting. In particular with immigrant communities, communities that are really marginalized in California, we continue to see things like checkpoints, stop and frisk policies. We continue to see drug arrests, disproportionate numbers of drug arrests for people of color. In particular, in San Francisco, what we've seen is an overwhelming number of drug arrests as it relates to our African-American community there. Despite being only 6% of the population in San Francisco, African-Americans still make up over 60% of those jailed for drug arrest. And so when we talk about racial disparities, when we talk about what kinds of transformative changes really need to happen at the base level with communities and with law enforcement, there's some really huge obstacles and barriers that we need to overcome overall. And I also wanted to lift up the comment made by my sister to my left as well, in terms of, it's great to hear all the great work that is being done by the members that came to testify today, but we're not hearing that on a day-to-day basis. We get calls all the time from folks in terms of how they are being intimidated, how they are being harassed. I get calls from mothers every day who are just trying to drive their kids to school, but because they are Latina and because they are women, they are stopped, asked for driver's licenses, and they are told, if we see you near the school again, we will arrest you next time. Because in California, if you don't have a driver's license, the officer can either warn you, give you a ticket, or place you under arrest. So these threats are real. These are people who are just living their daily lives. These are people who are going to school, going to work. We have day laborers on corners that are out there looking for work, constantly being harassed, constantly being threatened, and they're just there trying to make ends meet for their families. People are just trying to survive, and we have law enforcement oftentimes targeting our communities with these threats, with intimidation, and without any accountability. As was mentioned earlier, we do have the dehumanization of our communities. For Latinos and for immigrants, there's an added layer of their immigration status. So not only are we racially profiled, but we have bigger consequences if we get stuck and thrown into the criminal justice system. For many people, one single drug offense can mean they can never, ever either come back into the country or can never fix their immigration status. They are essentially exiled from everything they've ever known. And so when we look at what type of police practices need to occur and what kind of changes need to occur, we need to really look at transformative changes, because what needs to happen is there needs to be a change and a shift in the entire culture and the debate around these issues. We need to be honest about what happens to our communities, but we also need to really look at these systems that have been created to discriminate, that have been created based on the hands of racism. It's not going to change overnight. I mean, I definitely believe that transformative change can take place, but I also really want to emphasize that there's a huge need to change the systems that we have built that continues to dehumanize and target these communities on so many levels. It's not enough to go after the one officer that's involved in this officer-involved shooting in this one incident. It's not enough to just do that. We can't let the whole department off the hook, but we can't let the whole system off the hook either. So we have to really look at these issues when we talk about this and kind of have more of an honest debate. As mentioned earlier, I did have an opportunity to talk to folks across the state. I talked to a colleague out in the Central Valley, and she basically coined the term, it's the New South for Latinos in the Central Valley. We have no representation in our city councils. We have no representation in levels of leadership for us. And for us, it's like the New South. And when you're an immigrant, when you have that double layer or the triple layer of being a person of color, an immigrant, and a female, you have all these things already against you. It does feel like it's the New South. It does feel like you have no rights, you have nowhere to go, you don't know how to figure out the system, you don't speak the language. There are all these obstacles that our communities face, and no one there to help them, no one there to even listen to them. One of the big points that my colleague out from the Central Valley made was that the way the system is set up to look at officer-involved shootings is that there's no openness in terms of what that police officer has been engaged in the past. Has a police officer ever been involved in an officer-involved shooting? What kind of record did this officer have before they came onto the force? Oftentimes, these police officers are back on the streets, and what kind of message is that sending to our communities and to our youth and to people who do look to the police for safety and for trust? It's really hard. The other comment I heard was, there's never been trust with law enforcement. We're talking about rebuilding trust, but trust has never existed for our communities. And so that really struck me. Growing up as a person growing up in this country, I never thought about that, but I never thought of that perspective, not ever having trust. Because when you look at our history, it hasn't been a history built upon that. It's been a history of discrimination and racism. And so that comment really struck home for me. The other thing I wanted to mention is, for immigrants, like I said, there is that added layer of their immigration status. California was able to pass the Trust Act in 2013. This is a law that provides guidelines for law enforcement to follow when they should honor an immigration hold from Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. That law has just been implemented in 2014. MALDIF, along with other civil rights partners across the state, have been working on this in terms of the implementation end and the legal end. And we've seen a pattern of noncompliance with the Trust Act. We see law enforcement holding folks beyond the 48 hours that they are supposed to hold folks for ICE. We see them holding individuals that shouldn't be held to begin with if they would follow what the Trust Act guidelines are. And then we've also seen law enforcement sort of go around the intent of the Trust Act and notify ICE when an individual is being released, so that individual is not being picked up directly from where they're being detained, but they may be picked up at their home or on their way, en route to their home. And so these are things where we see the erosion of trust between law enforcement and our communities, and these are things that we really, really hope that we can work on. In terms of solutions for the Trust Act, I think we do have to sort of fix some of the things and ensure that law enforcement can't get around the Trust Act, make sure that they are following guidelines that are in place so that immigrants and our communities can feel safer The other piece I wanted to mention as well is that often doesn't get talked about is that there's collateral damage for all of our communities. So the fact that I may be Latina or that I may be a Southeast Asian woman, the fact that I live so closely or in the same neighborhood, our communities are suffering as well. But we don't hear that. We don't hear that in the media. What we hear is, the villainization of the victims, the villainizations of their family, but we don't hear, who are the people and who are the communities that are being affected. And so we really need to do a better job of ensuring that these individuals are part of the process, that they are included in those review processes, that the information that's out there that exists over these officer-involved shootings, for example, is more open, and that people have the opportunity to voice their concerns and to really listen to the folks who have a stake in the victimization.